Welcome back, everybody. All right, now, um, due to the honestly amazing viewership of my worst teams in NBA history video, I'm going to do the greatest teams in NBA history. Like I've said before, sorry, like I've said before, this since nobody can agree on an actual, um, really on an actual team, honestly. Um, I mean, it's either the Warriors for some reason, the Bulls, the Celtics, the Showtime Lakers, the Kobe Shaq Lakers. There's really just such a huge debate and argument about what teams are the greatest teams of all time. But for me today, I'm going to go into each team's history once again. And instead of looking for the worst team, I'm going to give you my opinion of what the best team of all time is. Now, starting with it is a start. Let's get started. And looking at it here, the first team that I am going to be talking about today is the 2014-15 Atlanta Hawks. This team was really fun to watch. They really knew how to play basketball. It was honestly a very Spurs like almost with the way they played basketball. I mean, obviously with Budenholzer, who's a Popovich uh, part of his Popovich's staff in past years. I just thought this I mean, that team was really fun to watch. I mean, you had Paul Millsap, who was kind of like having just blowing up again. You had Jeff Teague, who was a solid guard. You had Al Horford. Then you had Kyle Korver shooting the lights out. You had Damari Carroll. You just had a lot of good talent. And this team, they started off slow, but that's when they went on a huge run and they ended up winning 14 of 16 games. And that was really the catalyst of, hey, they found their rhythm and they took it and they ran with it. Unfortunately, just because you win 60 games, it does not mean that you are going to win a championship. And that's when they ran into LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers in the 2015 Eastern Conference Finals, and Kyrie Irving as well. That Cleveland team was also stacked in itself. We'll go into the best Cleveland team of all time later on, but just a really disappointing finish to their season. I think they're the first team with 60 wins in NFL, NBA history to be swept out of the conference finals. The first 60 win team to be swept out of the conference finals. And I'm honestly digging into the history of the NBA, thinking about it. I think this might be the first team to ever be swept, 60 win team to be swept out of a um, playoff series. In all honesty, thinking about it, and after looking through every year that I've looked through, but this was a good team. It didn't last too long. Free agency and trades, and just also the age of the guys at their core that they had. They're getting a little up there, at least in the basketball sense. Kyle Korver kind of faded away. Al Horford left in free agency. I think they traded Millsap, or he actually no, he signed a huge deal with Utah, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then Teague kind of became just a Jeff Teague kind of he was just more of a kind of a floater. He just floated around the league, played in a bunch of places, really couldn't cement himself anywhere else, unfortunately. But that team, unfortunately, kind of fell apart not too long after. They remained kind of average until that's when it really just kind of fell apart officially. And then Trae Young came into the mix, and now the Hawks are trying to build back up to this point. Um, Next up now for the Boston Celtics. Honestly, this is as easy and as guaranteed of a fucking, excuse my language, of a pick as you can get. And it's the 85-86 Celtics. And honestly, I'm going to let you know right now, being a Celtic fan, growing up in a household where um, my dad was a big Celtics fan who watched this team religiously. Honestly, a Celtics team today could go 73, 74, and 8. And to the minds of a lot of Celtic fans, this team will still reign supreme. I mean, This team was unbelievable. If you've ever watched highlights of this team, they played some of the most beautiful basketball we've ever seen. The passing, just the unselfish play, just how really in sync they were, just unbelievable basketball. And also the greatest home court record of all time. They did not lose. They have only lost one single game at home throughout the entire season, and that includes the postseason as well. They're basically unbeatable at home. I think they lost at home to Portland on Christmas Day, and then after that, they would not lose another home game until early in the 86-87 season. This team was just unbelievable. Bird obviously ran the show, but I mean, 5 Hall of Famers on this team is just unbelievable. It's so impressive. Or yeah, 5 Hall of Famers. Sorry, you had obviously Bird, you had McHale, you had Parrish, you had DJ, who's probably one of the most disrespected Hall of Famers and great point guards of all time. And then obviously you had Bill Walton, who was kind of having a renaissance year after just miserable seasons on the bench, being hurt, his feet just and his body just betraying him. But honestly, this was his last healthy year. 87 after this year, 87, his body betrayed him again, and that was it. Parrish, he remained healthy and became honestly one of the best centers of all time, probably top 10, top 15 centers of all time. We all know what happened to Bird. His back ended up giving out on him. The next year, McHale played on a broken foot or a fractured foot, and sadly, he was never the same. He lasted until 93, and that was really it for this Celtics team. I mean, they would make one more finals appearance, and then they wouldn't get past, I think, the second round after that. Just one of the great teams of all time. And in some people's minds, and basically up in New England, it's the greatest team of all time in basketball history. Coming up next, this is going to be a surprise, but honestly, I'm sticking with this, and I'm confident in this pick. And for the Nets, it's not the Brooklyn Nets with KD, Kyrie, and James Harden. I'm not just tossing that team in here because it's wrong. I'm sorry, but that team is not the best team in Nets history in my mind. It's not. I mean, you want to look at a team that played great basketball together, and it was the Jason Kidd teams. They played excellent basketball. Not only that, I mean, Jason Kidd knew he ran this team. He ran this team. Say what you want about the Eastern Conference. It was weak at this time. Yes, it was. But let's be real here. I don't care what I see on paper. And Kyrie, Durant, and Harden were the most underwhelming big three I've ever seen. They barely stayed on the court together. The only person that was consistent out of all of those three guys was KD. Outside of that, you had Kyrie doing his crazy thing, and then you had James Harden when he ended up getting hurt, but when stuff stopped going his way, he did what he normally did. And for the second time in about 3 years, he quit on a team. But I mean, this team was unbelievable. Uh, you had Kenyon Martin leading all the scores, 14.9 points a game. They were a very low scoring team, but they knew how to play some. They knew how to play some defense. Let me tell you, Keith Van Horn, just a solid piece coming off the bench and would start occasionally. He would average 7 boards a game. Jason Kidd, obviously, I don't know why it's not there, but he averaged, I think, over 10 assists a game. He would lead the league in assists and triple doubles. And his first full season as a New Jersey Net. And going down to the head coach, I'll say it again, Byron Scott. I know he was on the list a couple of times on the worst teams of all time, but that he is a great coach. He really is. And you'll see him a few more times on this list. He's just a good coach. And I mean, looking at it, he's just a really good coach. Kid finished the season first team All NBA. He was also first team All Defense. Richard Jefferson, he would be second team All Rookie. And then this team was just full of guys who knew how to grind. I mean, Aaron Williams, you had Lucius Harris. I mean, thinking about it now, how much of a bust he was, but at that time he was still a pretty solid player for this team. Kerry Kittles, just up and down the lineup. You had very good, reliable guys that knew how to play games and knew how to play in this particular system. They would get to the NBA Finals this year, where they would unfortunately get swept by the Lakers. I mean, after Shaq and Kobe, that's all I need to know. Those teams were not getting beat in the finals, especially during that era when it came to the Eastern Conference. Um, After this season, they would make it only to the finals one more time. They would make a lot of good deep playoff runs. After this, they would honestly, after getting embarrassed by the Lakers, they would acquire Dikembe Mutombo and a couple more bigs to try to see if, hey, maybe we can find somebody to slow down Shaq. But Shaq was the greatest force in NBA history. I don't care what anybody says. In the modern era, Shaquille O'Neal was the greatest force and unstoppable force in NBA history. Period. Period. But unfortunately, this team would make the NBA Finals one more time and fall to the Spurs in 03. They would make a couple runs again to the Eastern Conference Finals. I think the next year they would make the Eastern Conference Finals or the year after, but unfortunately would fall to the Detroit Pistons, who were just a juggernaut themselves. Um, But I mean, hey, 52 and 30, 38, 3 and 8 at home, 19 and 22 on the road. Eastern Conference champions for that New Jersey Nets team for that particular time, after completely having a huge turnaround after just a miserable season the year before the kid trade. Solid season, a solid team. Next up, so I'm going to go with the Charlotte Bobcats of 2009 and 2010. Now, I know what you're thinking, but aren't they they are the Charlotte Hornets now? Yes, they are, but they are not, even though as much as people like to think that, they are not connected to the original Charlotte Hornets. The original Charlotte Hornets were created in the late 80s, early 90s. They came into the NBA. They would move to New Orleans after the 02-03 season. Yeah, 02-03 season. They would become the New Orleans Hornets, and then now they are the New Orleans Pelicans. So I do not include the Larry Johnson teams, the Alonzo Mourning teams of the early 90s with the Bobcats or the new Hornets that we see today. This Hornets team that we have today came from the Charlotte Bobcats, whose first season was in, I believe, 04-05. Now, this team here was the first of the new Charlotte Bobcats / Hornets teams to make the postseason after their recreation in 04-05. This team is a very good coach team, coached by the great Larry Brown, and what would be his final coaching, not the second to last year coaching in the NBA. This would also be Michael Jordan's very first season as the owner of the Charlotte franchise. And it started off good. He was making good deals. I mean, he acquired Tyson Chandler for Emeka Okafor, who turned out, unfortunately, to be a bust. And definitely, he was a solid player, but he definitely wasn't worth the number one overall pick. And then he would trade Raja Bell and Vladimir Radmanovic for Steven Jackson, who is an NBA champion in his own right and a solid wing player, and just a tough guy that brought a lot of physicalness to the game, and a very entertaining guy also on the podcast too, on his podcast. This team would allow they would allow the lowest points per game in the NBA at the time, 93.8. Now, a lot of people really couldn't remember this team. I mean, they probably don't even think of the Bobcats anymore outside of that disastrous season where they only won 7 games. But this team was really good. I mean, they still had Tyson Chandler, they had Steven Jackson, Gerald Wallace, they had Raymond Felton running the point. They were really good. I mean, they had not really, really good, but they were still very solid in their own right. And unfortunately, um, they would not get out of the first round, let alone win a game in the first round against a very, very tough Orlando team. This Charlotte team would be finished 44 and 38 on the season, 31 and 10 at home, 13 and 28 on the road. Steven Jackson would lead all scorers with 21.1 points per game. Gerald Wallace would be the leading guy on the boards with 10 rebounds a game. And then Raymond Felton would average 5.6 assists a game. Now, probably one of the most, again, next to the Celtics pick, one of the most obvious picks I can honestly ever make. And for the Bulls, it's very, very simple. It's the 95-96 Bulls. I mean, just there's I mean, really, what else can you say about this team? I mean, this team was a juggernaut. Um, Finished 72-10 at the time, the most wins ever in an NBA season. Um, they went 39-2 at home, second greatest home record of all time. They would go 33-8, the second greatest road record of all time, later to be broken by the 73-win Golden State Warriors. And another little fact, they were the best three-loss. They went on to have the best three-loss record of all time. They would start 41-3 through 44 games. Just a ridiculous stat. Jordan would win the MVP this year. He was also the league leader. He was the league leader in scoring and in points per game at 30.4. Kukoc would win Sixth Man of the Year. You had Dennis Rodman, just one of the greatest the greatest rebounders of all time. One of the greatest rebounders of all time at 14.9 boards a game this year. Scottie Pippen would lead the in the passing category at 5.9 assists per game, along with just solid play up and down. I mean, you had Luke Longley down at the 5. Ron Harper was running the point. Excellent point guard. Another underrated point guard in NBA history. Just a very good player. Phil Jackson would obviously be the head coach running the triangle in that season. Jordan's first full year back after his retirement, his quick retirement, I should say. They would end up winning the NBA Finals over the Seattle Supersonics 4-2, even though it did get a little sketchy for them. They were up 3-0, and then Seattle came back with 2 straight wins until the Bulls finally closed it out at home at the United Center. Coming up next now, let's just go through it. I mean, Jordan and Pippen, before we move on to the Cavs. Jordan and Pippen were first team All-NBA. Jordan, Pippen, and Rodman were first team all defense. Just like I said, this team was a juggernaut. They were ridiculous in every sense of the word. Just unbelievable. Now, next up, another kind of obvious pick for me anyway. I don't know how anybody else will feel about this, but for the Cavs, it's obvious. The 2015-2016 Cleveland Cavaliers. This team is also loaded in their own way. I mean, they just had veterans galore that had experience in playoff basketball, just up and down. They would go 57-25, 33-8 at home, 24-17 on the road. LeBron would lead the team in scoring and passing, 25.3 points a game, 6.8 assists a game, and Kevin Love would be the leading man on the boards at 9.9 rebounds a game. Now, there's a little issue with the coaching here. David Blatt, I think this is the only team on the list that you'll see with 2 coaches. So David Blatt, 30-11 before his honestly surprise firing. Honestly, I remember that too. I think they lost by 30 at home before the firing, and it just seems like these guys just gave up on them. Gave up on him. They know who they wanted, and it was Tyronn Lue. And obviously, Tyronn Lue, he would finish 27-14 on the season, but he would lead the way as a coach all the way to the NBA Finals for them. And obviously, we all know that this was the year that they pulled off the greatest comeback in Finals history, down 3-1 against the mighty Warriors. And they would shock the world with a huge Kyrie Irving 3. Obviously, can't forget about the LeBron block on the Iguodala layup in Game 7, but everybody's going to remember one of the greatest shots of all time, and that's Kyrie Irving, Game 7 on the road, a chance to win the title, and he made it. Obviously, this is one of the greatest teams of all time, in my opinion. LeBron, he was the first team All-NBA, another solid all-around season for him, and to continue his legacy as he continues to this day pushing for the GOAT status. Now, this team is honestly the next team on this list is one of my favorite teams of all time that I still love to go back and watch highlights of, and that is the 2010-2011 Dallas Mavericks. Now, let me tell you, I don't care. I will die on this hill saying this. This was the greatest postseason run ever. Period. Greatest postseason run ever. Let's just go through the teams that but first, let's go through everything here. They were 57-25. They were 29-12 at home. They were 28-13 on the road. Dirk led all scorers, 23 points per game. Tyson Chandler on the boards, magnificent 9.4 rebounds a game. Jason Kidd, in one of his last great seasons in the NBA, averaged 8.2 assists a game. And Rick Carlisle, another guy you'll see on this list a few times, honestly. He's another one of those guys who's just a great coach who's been in the game so long, former player. Guys respect him. He's just another great coach. And obviously, one of the biggest upsets in finals history in 6 games over the Miami Heat, the Heatles, however you want to call them, the big three, doesn't matter. Still one of the biggest upsets of all time. But I mean, let's go through the postseason run. I mean, just ridiculous. I mean, they first round they took on Portland, who still were a pretty solid all around team. They had Brandon Roy, they had LaMarcus Aldridge, they had Nicholas Batum. Just just a really good team in the Western Conference that really played well in the postseason. They just could never, honestly, they just couldn't stay healthy. Next up, you had the two-time defending champion Los Angeles Lakers and Phil Jackson's final season coaching in the NBA, and they kicked their ass. They kicked their ass. I mean, it was such a just I never thought game 4. I still remember watching to this day, really with my jaw hitting the floor with just how they just beat them to a pulp. I mean, they were hitting every shot. I think that's the game they broke the record for most 3-pointers in a postseason game. Thinking about it now, I'm pretty sure that record has been broken. I'm not sure. Comment below if it has. But you could just tell that Lakers team was gassed. I mean, they had won 3 straight Western Conference Finals, back-to-back champions. I mean, they were exhausted. They were gassed. They'd won a countless playoff series, and they were just done. But this team, with all the veteran leadership they had, I mean, they did have Dirk, they had Jason Terry, they had Tyson Chandler, they had they had Jason Kidd, obviously. They had a bunch of guys that not a lot of people remember, like Deshaun Stevenson. They had JJ Barea. They had Sean Marion still. Peja Stojakovic, believe it or not, was on the end of their bench. I mean, just this team was great all the way around, filled with just veteran guys. And unfortunately, you can kind of guess where I'm getting at when I say veteran guys. The aftermath, this was their last shot, and they took advantage of it, and they won a title. They won a title. And boy, it was just such an exciting team to watch. Unfortunately, after this, um, Tyson Chandler would not get re-signed. Jason Terry would have one more season in Dallas. And then after that, sadly, Dirk was just kind of left, and he stayed loyal, which you got to respect Dirk for that. He stayed loyal to the very end, staying in Dallas, hoping for maybe one more chance, but he never got it. But he still retired as one of the greatest players of all time. Next up, or actually going through this team, um, Tyson Chandler was the league leader in true shooting percentage at 69%. Dirk would finish on the second team All NBA, and then Tyson Chandler would finish on the second All Team defense. Um, Tyson Chandler was pretty solid in his own right. He was a journeyman just by definition, only because he played around the league for a very long time, but he was still a very solid defensive player, great guy around the rack, a great guy around the rim that could get some solid putbacks and just take down some alley oops. Just ridiculous. Now, this is the newest team on the list, or the most recent team, I should say, on the list. This one was close. I'm just going to go ahead and click it here. The 2022-23 Denver Nuggets. For me, this was close, only because I still remember the Carmelo Nuggets from, I think, 08-09. They went all the way to the Western Conference Finals. They were also deep. I mean, Carmelo, Nene, Kenyon Martin, Chauncey Billups, Birdman Anderson. I mean, just all up and down. I mean, and J.R. Smith as well. I mean, another guy from from the Cavs team that was just ridiculous. But this team, um, definitely the greatest Nuggets team of all time. Yes, I'm gonna say it right now. It's because they won the title. That's winning the title was the kind of the thing for me that pushed them over the top as the greatest Nuggets team of all time. I mean, everybody knows about this team. Michael Malone, head coach, 53 and 29. Nikola Jokic led everybody basically with a triple double. They beat the Miami Heat in the finals in 5 games. In my opinion, relatively easy. Unfortunately, my Celtics weren't there to maybe give them more of a challenge. But I mean, this team, it was a great team. It still is. I mean, I know they lost a couple guys in free agency like Jeff Green, Bruce Brown, but up and down, Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic, Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr., Christian Braun, just a great team from that last year. And we'll see if they can repeat. I mean, there's a lot of loaded teams up in the NBA right now. Just in the Western Conference, a lot of teams reloaded, and then obviously you just have a very, very good teams in the Eastern Conference, like my Celtics. Jokic was the league leader in true shooting percentage at a ridiculous 70%. He was also second team All NBA this year. Next up is going to be the Detroit Pistons, but it's not going to be the 04 Pistons. It's not going to be the 04 Pistons because there was a team that was better than them and in their history, and that was the 88-89 Detroit Pistons, the Bad Boys. I'm sorry, but this Bad Boys team, they took it to another level in the postseason. This is also the year that they traded their leading scorer. They were pretty average down the stretch. Before the trade, they were 32 and 13, which is pretty good, but still, for a team coming out of an NBA Finals appearance, losing in 7 games to the Lakers, that's still pretty. That's not as good as they wanted it to be. There were a lot of issues amongst the team when it came to chemistry. There was problems between Isaiah and Dantley, as we all know from the 30 for 30, as much as Dantley likes to deny it. But then they would make a huge trade on the 15th of February, 1989, trading Adrian Dantley to the Dallas Mavericks for Mark Aguirre. And after that, I mean, Mark Aguirre fit with this team perfectly. I mean, him and Isaiah Thomas just had a very good chemistry together. Bill Laimbeer was still a goon. Joe Dumars was probably one of the greatest two-way guards of all time. Great defensive guy, great shooter, great scorer. They would go 37-4 at home. Very unbeatable at home, I'd say. They would be 26-15 on the road. Chuck Daly again, leading this team. Dumars was first team all defense. Rodman was first team all defense. They allowed the second lowest field goal percentage in the NBA that year. They were 32 and 13 at the time of the trade. And then after the trade, they would go on a run 31 and 6. Just a great run. And then obviously their playoff run, another just ridiculous teams that they'd have to play. They would have to play the Celtics. They'd have to play Jordan and the Bulls. Jordan was on his way up. And then honestly, this is where it kind of pushed it over the top for me with this team, was that they not only beat the Lakers, but they swept the Lakers. And honestly, after this game, after that series, it was an end of the era for the Lakers. Showtime was over because Kareem would end up retiring after Game 4, after they lost, and then Pat Riley would step down. So it was an obvious end of the era, and then the Lakers had to start over, kind of. Not like really start over, but still start over. And they would only make one more NBA Finals with that core, and that was it. So this was the kind of the changing of the guard for the Western Conference. As Portland was coming up, Houston was still there, San Antonio was on their way up, Phoenix was on their way up. Just great teams that you saw in the 90s really show their presence after the Showtime Lakers died. Now, next up for the Golden State Warriors. I'm a firm believer in 73 and 9 do not mean a thing without the ring. Besides, I mean, I'm sorry. Comparing the teams, I don't care. Kevin Durant pushes this team over the 73-9 team, and it's not close. I'm sorry. Uh, Kevin Durant over Harrison Barnes, basically. um, this team would go 67-15. They would be 36-5 at home, 31-10 on the road. Again, one of the greatest road records of all time. Not the greatest road record, obviously. Steph would average 25-3, continuing his ridiculous season or his career after an unbelievable MVP campaign the year prior. Kevin Durant would average 8 boards a game. Draymond Green would be the leading assist man at 7.0 assists a game. Steve Kerr would obviously be the head coach, 67-15 himself. I think he missed a couple of weeks. He had some health issues, I believe. I'm not sure. This team would sweep their way to the finals. I mean, just outrageous. And then they would easily dispatch Cleveland in 5. This year, Draymond would win the Defensive Player of the Year. He would lead the league in just 2 steals a game. Curry led the league in 3-pointers made, obviously, 324. He would also be named to second-team All-NBA with Kevin Durant, and Draymond Green would be named to the third-team All-NBA, plus being named to the first-team All-Defense. This team was just great up and down. As soon as you heard the announcement that Kevin Durant chose the Warriors, it was over. Let's be honest, it was over, and it was going to take a monumental collapse for them not to win it all, or something crazy happening for them not to win it all this year. Next up, and honestly, this might surprise people, but for the Houston Rockets, the best team in history, it's not any of the Olajuwon teams. And I'm going to go with the James Harden team. This team should have been in the finals. Let's be honest. They had Golden State on the ropes in 2018 in the Western Conference Finals. They had them on the ropes. This team went 65-17, 34-7 at home, 31-10 on the road. They were a Chris Paul injury away from being in the NBA Finals. They really were. And the reason, and if anybody who doubts Chris Paul being his presence there and that being the difference, you'll see it on this list. Because I'm telling you now, this is not the last time you're going to hear about me talking about Chris Paul. It's not. Harden was the MVP this year. This was by far when he was at the peak of his powers offensively. Led the league in scoring, 30.4 points a game. Clayton Capella, great on the boards, 10.8 rebounds a game. And James Harden, obviously, the great facilitator that he is, 8.8 assists per game. Mike D'Antoni, again, another great coach, 60 offensively, I will say, 65-17. Unfortunately, defense was not his strong suit, or a lot of his team's strong suits. They would lose to the Western Conference Finals to Golden State in Game 7. The biggest takeaway from that Game 7 is that I believe they missed 20-plus straight three-pointers in that Game 7. So I hate to say, just a massive choke job, unfortunately. I mean, it would have been interesting to see because it definitely would have been a closer NBA Finals if Cleveland and Houston were the matchup, or even if Houston and Boston were the matchup. Because the Eastern Conference Finals also went to 7 games that year. This team also hit more 3-pointers than any team in the league that year at over 1,200 3-pointers. Capella led the league in field goal percentage. Harden led the league in 3-pointers made at 265. And then obviously Harden, being the MVP that he was the named to the first team All-NBA. The aftermath of this team, unfortunately, it kind of fell apart. Injuries happened, and they could just never recapture this magic that they had. And then now we are where the Rockets are today, where they're just in full rebuild mode, even though I think they're going to be pretty good this year, even though they have started 0-2. I still think they're going to have a good shot this year of at least playing spoiler to a lot of teams. Now, next up, we're going into Pacers history now. And another forgotten team, unfortunately. Well, not completely forgotten. They're remembered for all the wrong reasons. Well, at least the team after. And it's the 03-04 Indiana Pacers. Just a team that they were 61-21. They were 34-7 at home, and they were 27-14 on the road. And if the Detroit Pistons did not exist this year, this team would have gone to the finals and they would have won the NBA Finals. They would have won the NBA Finals. This team was so strong. They were just one of the best defensive teams of all time. They were second in points allowed, a game allowed, obviously behind Detroit in that statistic. Our Ron Artest, now Meta World Peace, would win the Defensive Player of the Year. Jermaine O'Neal will be named to the second team All NBA, while Artest would be named to the third team All NBA, while he would also be named to the first team All Defense. The ridiculous stats that I saw from this team, I mean, they allowed under 80 points in 27 games. That's why I said this team is one of the greatest teams of all time defensively, is because this team is, I honestly, if you think, you don't even see that you barely see that in college, maybe. I don't know. I'm not as knowledgeable about the college basketball game as I am about the NBA. But still, that's still a ridiculous stat. 80 points, less than 80 points in 27 games in the modern NBA. It's outrageous. They would also allow under 80 points in 6 out of their 16 playoff games. Unfortunately, in one of those games where they did allow under 80 points, they lost in Game 6 to Detroit in a ridiculous ending that, honestly, if a couple of things went their way, they're in the finals against the Lakers in really at the tail end of the last year of the Kobe Shaq Lakers. And that team was such a mess. Just the drama, the infighting, the injuries. I just don't think the Lakers are still winning the NBA Finals, whether the Pacers or the Pistons are there. Jermaine O'Neal would average 20.1 points a game. He would also average exactly 10 boards a game. Jamal Tinsley would average 5.8 assists a game. Not only would you have Ron Artest, Jamal Tinsley, Jermaine O'Neal, but you would also have Reggie Miller still. He's taken the official back seat. He wasn't the guy anymore. He was honestly just there, hopefully trying to win a ring. And unfortunately, the aftermath of this team is really what they're known for. And it's the malice at the palace. Just an unfortunate thing that happened where after that, everything kind of fell apart. Ron Artest and Steven Jackson were suspended for a ridiculous amount of time. Reggie Miller would retire after 04-05. And Jermaine O'Neal had trouble staying healthy. Ron Artest would then be traded. Steven Jackson would be let go. And unfortunately, or in my opinion, I think that the Pacers haven't been, even through the Paul George years, I don't think that they have been this good ever since. Now, up next, for the Los Angeles Clippers, and it's the 2013-2014 LA Clippers. This team was very, very deep. They were 57-25 on the season. Sorry, folks. I'm just trying to get them kind of blanking on how deep their roster was of this year. But they would be 34-7 at home. They would be 23-18 on the road. This was the first year of the Doc Rivers regime in Los Angeles. Blake Griffin would average 24.1 points a game. He was hitting his stride as amongst the NBA's best. DeAndre Jordan would also average 13.6 rebounds a game, which would put him as the league leader in basketball in rebounds per game and rebounds total. Chris Paul, again, averaged 10.7 assists a game. He was in his prime. He would be the league leader in steals per game and assists per game. DeAndre Jordan would also be the leader in field goal percentage. Chris Paul would be named the first team All NBA. Griffin would be second team All NBA. Chris Paul again would be the first team All Defense. They would acquire a couple pieces, including JJ Redick at the trade deadline from Orlando. And obviously, I'm also going to give them a little bit of a nod because of just under the shit that they played that year. From after the ridiculous just fiasco with their former owner Donald Sterling, a disgusting human being who just said some of the most miserable things a human being could say about really another human being. Um, and to play through that and really just and play well too when your ownership is just and your team is under fire, and I give all those players the respect of how of standing up the way they did. Just I mean, ridiculous that they had to play through that. Luckily, Donald Sterling was banned for life, well deserved. But looking at this roster here, I mean, looking at it, Matt Barnes, Reggie Bullock, Darren Collison, Jamal Crawford would be huge off the bench for them. I think he'd win sixth man of the year that year. I'm not really sure. Comment below if you do know. Big Baby was on the team. Jared Dudley, Danny Granger towards the end. Willie Green, another solid sharpshooter. Steven Jackson making another appearance. Anton Jameson, kind of towards the end of his career, but bringing that leadership role. JJ Redick, Hidu Turkoglu, shooting. Um, I know people say that this is Lob City, but sorry, it wasn't. And we're going to go into the true Lob City later on, and a team that's very forgotten in NBA history. But this team would lose in 6 games in the Western Conference semifinals to the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think this was the series where Chris Paul just had a massive brain fart at the end of one of these games that really put him on the ropes, and they unfortunately never recovered from it. And honestly, this is kind of the beginning where Chris Paul, his legacy would take a hit of a guy who just could not get it done in the playoffs. Now, for the Lakers, there's so many to choose from. There really was. There was so much to choose from. And I'm sorry, I'm not just going to go and pick the Showtime Lakers blindly. I'm not. And I'm sorry, I didn't. And for this team, for the greatest Laker team of all time, it's 2000 to 2001 LA Lakers. They finished 56 and 26, 31 and 10 at home, 25 and 16 on the road. The reason why this record is not better is because they suffered just a ridiculous amount of injuries in the season. But boy, when they hit their stride, they were unstoppable. Shaquille O'Neal, I mean, in my opinion, looking at these stats, if Allen Iverson didn't just play as well as he did, I'm sorry, Shaq should have taken home this MVP trophy. 28 and 12 is just a ridiculous stat line. He was the most unstoppable force, like I said earlier, in basketball, in modern day basketball. I know people are going to talk about Wilt Chamberlain, but I'm sorry, modern day basketball. So I'd say from like 1980 till now, Shaquille O'Neal was the most unstoppable force in NBA history, period. Not only did they have him, he would be the league leader in field goal percentage at 57%. He would also be obviously named to the first team All NBA. But Kobe Bryant was coming into his own. Kobe Bryant, at this point, was having the best year of his career. I think he averaged a little under 28 points a game, just right under Shaquille O'Neal. He was the leading assist man at 5 assists a game. Phil Jackson was obviously hitting his stride as the head coach of the LA Lakers. They'd sweep their way to the finals, and if it wasn't for just a ridiculous performance in Game 1 from Allen Iverson, this team probably goes 16, or no, at that time it was 15 games to win it all, so 15 and 0. Yeah. Sorry, folks, a little bit of a drink break here. But again, this team was also loaded in their own right, along with Shaq and Kobe. They would have Derek Fisher, who was having he was having a great season himself. They would have Rick Fox, who was a very reliable guy off the bench. They had Devin George, who was a young player who could provide a little bit of a spark. Ron Harper, Horace Grant at the end of really their careers, along with Brian Shaw. Obviously, Big Shot Bob. Just solid guys, solid veterans that knew how to win and come in big situations and make a difference, which is a lot of what the team did. A lot of these teams do. I mean, they had those guys that just knew how to make a difference. Um, Next up on the list, going into the Memphis Grizzlies history. I'm not going to pick the John Morant one, so don't even bother. Sorry, I'm not going to pick their year last year because they just and they're not the best in team history. And the best team in Grizzlies history was the 2012-13 Memphis Grizzlies, coached by Lionel Hollins, who would go 56 and 26. They would win 32. They would go 32 and 9 at home, 24 and 17 on the road. This is another team that traded their leading scorer. They would trade Rudy Gay and acquired Tayshaun Prince, Austin Day, and Ed Davis. This team would stick to their identity, which was defense, 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 defense. This team would be honestly, they have the honor of being one of the last teams, if not the last team, to average under 90 points given up a game. The way the NBA is now, you'll never see that again. You'll never see that again unless there is a massive talent drop in the NBA, or if there's some crazy new rules that they put into place that basically handicaps offensive players from scoring. There's no way that you'll ever see a team average or give up under 90 points a game in the NBA season ever again. And this team is the last team to do it. Before he was traded, Gay would average 17.2 points a game. Zach Randolph, the true leader of this team, would have 11.2 boards a game. And Mike Conley, who would really blow up this year, would average 6.1 assists per game. They would get swept in the Western Conference Finals over San Antonio. I mean, this team went as far as they could. Let's be real. This team went as far as they could. They were a great defensive team, but they just didn't have the offense, or they just didn't have the offensive talent to compete with a team like San Antonio that year. Just was no way. They did have Marc Gasol as well. They did have defensive specialists and Celtic, great Celtic Tony Allen, who became one of the greatest defensive players in his era. Zach Randolph would be the league leader in offensive rebounds. Conley would lead the league in steals. Marc Gasol would be named to the second team All NBA. Kind of also him taking that jump into superstardom. Tony Allen would be named to the first team All Defense. Mike Conley was named to the second team All Defense, along with Marc Gasol, who's also named to the second team All Defense. As you could tell, like I said, this team was just a solid defensive team. And like I said, they went as far as they were going to go, because the next team on this list came from the same year, and it's the best team in Miami Heat history, and that is the 2012-2013 Miami Heat. Holy crap, this team is ridiculous. In the offseason, they would steal Ray Allen from my Celtics and also sign Rashard Lewis, adding to their ridiculous depth that they already had. Their starting lineup had Chalmers, obviously James, Wade, and Bosch. Just coming off the bench, they had Shane Battier. To put it into perspective, a lot of their guys on the bench would be starters on most teams in the NBA that year. I mean, it was just they were so deep. And honestly, this is where LeBron James was at the peak of his powers, in my opinion. This is where he was at the peak of his dominant self, in my opinion. Miami Heat James was just, after he finally got over the hump in 2012, along with again beating the Celtics, which I still can't. That series still hurts to this day, but after that, that's where he really hit his stride. I mean, just ridiculous. This Heat team would go 66 and 16. They're 37 and 4 at home, 29 and 12 on the road. James would lead the team in points, rebounds, and assists. Little under 27 points a game, 8 rebounds, and 7 assists a game. Eric Spoelstra would really join the ranks as amongst the best coaches in the league. 66 and 16. They would beat the San Antonio Spurs in a great Game 7. This series obviously remembered for the one of the greatest shots in NBA history by Ray Allen in Game 6 to save their season and save their championship. They would go on to win in overtime and then obviously win Game 7. Not only was James named the MVP of the league, he was the league leader in field goals, named to first team All NBA along with first team All Defense. Wade would be named to the third team All NBA. This team was pretty kind of like, I don't want to say average. For them, they were average towards the end of January. But then as soon as February hit, they were off and running. And they would win 37 of their final 40 games to, uh, along with a 27-game win streak that, except for a loss in Chicago, they could have probably broken the record of 31. I think it was 31 or 33, I think. But just this team was very deep, had unbelievable talent, veteran-wise, leadership, uh, and they almost lost. If it wasn't for Ray Allen, if Ray Allen didn't hit that shot, who knows? Maybe I'm talking about another Heat team. Maybe I'm talking about this team as one of the biggest. I don't want to say choke jobs, but one of the biggest disappointing finishes to a season by one of the great teams of all time. Next up, going into the Milwaukee Bucks. This is going to surprise people, but I'm not going to pick their title team from the 70s. One, I don't care about the 70s that much when it comes to great teams because I don't think that they're amongst the greatest of all time. Sorry, Wizard fans or Bullet fans, you're not going to see those teams with Wes Unseld on here, and you're not going to see the Kareem Bucks on here, but you will see a Bucks team that should have honestly won it all. This was the year that Giannis really jumped into the uh, average basketball fan minds as a just like a hey, this guy is going to be here and he's going to be uh, a dominant player in this league for the next 10 to 15 years. He would win his first MVP this year. Like I said, this would be the jump. This would be the season where he'd take the jump into where he's like named amongst the top 5 in basketball when it comes to talent. They would go 60-22. They would be 33-8 at home, 27-14 on the road. I remember this team because they kicked the shit out of my Celtics in 5 games. I mean, that series was not close after game 1. I mean, swept us in 4 straight, and they kicked our ass in every game. That would be the Kyrie Irving Celtics, but before he jumped ship. Giannis would be the team leader in points, rebounds, and assists. 27 points a game, 12.8 or 12.5 rebounds a game, and 5.9 assists a game. Mike Budenholzer would become one of the best coaches in basketball, or this is kind of would prove that hey, this season would prove that he's one of the best coaches in basketball. Giannis would win his first MVP. Brogdon would be the league leader in free throw percentage, 92%. Giannis would be named to the first team All NBA and All Defense, and Eric Bledsoe would make an appearance on the first team All Defense. So this team would fall short in the Eastern Conference Finals to the Toronto Raptors, who would go on to win the NBA Finals that year with Kawhi Leonard. But this was a good team, and I can't emphasize this enough. I'm not gonna put a shortened season on here, if that makes sense. I'm looking at everybody at an even playing field. So everybody, 82 games, modern era, so post 1970s. Sorry, that's just this is my opinion. If anybody disagrees, I'd love to see it below why you disagree. Let me know why I'm wrong about this team. But I'm seeing this team as an 82 win season or 82 game season. This team is amongst the best in Bucks history. Period. The next up is it's guaranteed only because it's kind of the only great team they've ever had. And I'm looking at the 03-04 Minnesota Timberwolves as the best team in Timberwolves history. It was pretty obvious. They would get as far as they ever went. It'd be finally the first time that the Timberwolves actually gave Garnett a solid team around him that could actually keep up. Garnett would be the leading scorer and rebounder, 24 points a game, a little under 14 rebounds a game. Sam Cassell would average 7.3 assists a game. Flip Saunders, another excellent coaching performance for him. They would end up losing to the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals in 6 games. Ooh, excuse me. Garnett would win an MVP. He would also be the league leader in rebounds per game, leader in scoring, league leader in rebounds, total rebounds. He would be named to the first team All NBA and first team All Defense, and Cassell would be named to the second team All NBA. Not only did you have Garnett, not only did you have Cassell, but you had Sprewell. You had guys like Serbiak coming off the bench. You had a couple other pieces too that, again, I mean, they're escaping my mind, unfortunately. Still, though, I think this was one of the solid team this year that is really forgotten in history. So not only they had a lot of guys that just could mesh together. Because I mean, Wally Serbiak, Latrell Sprewell. Really, I think this is Sprewell's last season in the NBA after the whole contract situation and what he said there, which means a very ungrateful comment. But I'm not going to go into that. But this was really the only team that really gave Garnett anything. And you can understand why Garnett harbors harsh feelings towards the Minnesota Timberwolves to this day and against the owner. Because it's a shame. I mean, Garnett was literally the perfect power forward. I mean, he revolutionized the modern day power forward. He could shoot. He wasn't those guys that was just going to sit in the block anymore and just wait for the ball and do anything and would just wait for it. He was a guy, along with guys like Dirk and Tim Duncan, that revolutionized the power forward position. And they just never. And honestly, I stick to the opinion of if Garnett and Duncan switched places, I don't think he wins 5, but he definitely wins more than 1 ring in that system. Because Garnett is one of the greatest power forwards of all time. He's not better than Duncan, but I still say he's one of the best power forwards of all time, and I think he would have been successful in that Spurs system. Aftermath of this is they would completely fall apart, ending up in trading Garnett for scraps in Boston. And he would finally get his well-deserved ring. He would get a Defensive Player of the Year. And really, after that, his legacy as one of the all-time greats was cemented. But the Timberwolves are still trying to work up back to that point. They still have never been to they haven't been to the conference final since. And maybe this year they do it, but I just don't see it with the type of team that they have right now. They have Anthony Edwards right now. They have Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, along with Mike Conley, who's still in the league today and still being very productive. But I don't see how they're going to beat teams like LA, both LA teams, the Clippers and the Lakers. I don't see how they can beat Denver. I don't see how they could beat Phoenix. I just don't see it. I don't see it. So, moving on though, the greatest team in Pelicans/Hornets history. So, like I said earlier, this includes the old Charlotte Hornets of the 90s because they moved to New Orleans after the 02-03 season and became the New Orleans Hornets, which are now the New Orleans Pelicans. So, I'm a stickler for that. I don't know why, but looking at the greatest team in Hornets/Pelicans history, for me, it's the original Lob City that people honestly forget were one of the best teams in 2007, 2008. And that's the New Orleans Hornets from 2007, 2008. This team was so fun to watch. Chris Paul was officially coming into his own as an all-star and as probably the best guard in the league. That year, I think at that point, you can say that he was the best guard in the league. Next to guys like Jason Kidd, Darren Williams, he was that guy. And I mean, 50, the most points or most wins I honestly remember them getting. And again, look at who their coach is, the big man, Byron Scott. Byron Scott, again, one of the best coaches of the recent era. Um, Paul would lead the league in assists per game, steals per game. I got another guy that was very productive for them, as you see here, Peja Stojakovic. And before his body finally betrayed him, he was the league leader in free throw percentage, and he was just a solid scorer for them. Chris Paul would be the leader. He would be named to the first team All NBA. He would be named to the second team All Defense. And like I said, this was the OG Lob City. Even if you hear Tyson Chandler talk about this team, I mean, it's pretty obvious the way they played that fast style. This was the original, the OG Lob City. And I can remember watching them too, and how well they played, and how up, like, they were going down the court in a hurry, and the alley oops left and right. David West being physical, Tyson Chandler being physical, and they just had a lot of good players, role players that fit that system around them, including guys like, Chris Anderson, Birdman. They had Bobby Jackson. They had Mike James. They had Mo Pete. They had Bonzi Wells. Just great players that fit that system and that knew how to do it and knew how to play. But, I mean, and honestly, they would get to the Western Conference semifinals, but sadly, they they couldn't get by the Spurs. And I do remember Game 7 of that series, and they low-key got screwed. Let's be honest. Um, People talk about scripts, and let's just say the conference finals of 07, 08. If you look at it, even as, I'm a Celtics fan, and I know my team won the NBA title that year, but the conference finals were Detroit, Boston, and LA and San Antonio. I mean, I don't want to say scripted, but Lakers Hornets just doesn't have the same pull as Lakers Spurs does of that time. So the Spurs would obviously go on to just get beat by uh, the Lakers in 5 games. This team, though, they would honestly never recapture that magic that they had this year, and they would be consistently in the playoffs every year, but they just couldn't find this magic that they had this year, and couldn't really improve upon it. They would make occasional signings here and there, but outside of that, they can never really get to that level again. All right, guys. So the next team um, that I'm looking at here, obviously, is the Knicks, and it was very hard to pick a Knicks team. I'm not picking the ones of the '70s, and I'm not picking um, the Carmelo season, Carmelo seasons. I'm gonna pick the '93, '94 New York Knicks, and honestly, this team, honestly, any team of this era from those years, you can honestly pick as one of some of the best teams in Knick history, because they were extremely talented, and they were extremely physical. They allowed the lowest points per game this year in the NBA, 91 and a half. Oakley was named to first team all defense. He would also lead the team in rebounds per game at 11.8. Patrick Ewing would be the leading scorer at 24.5 points a game. And John Starks would be the leading assist man at 5.9 assists a game. This team was led by Pat Riley. His second team that he coached, 57-25. They would go on to lose in the NBA Finals to the Houston Rockets. They would just fall short in Game 7. This team is just very aggressive. Their style of play on defense was just so cool to see. Even to this, obviously, I'm not saying I was alive back then, but just watching replays of this team and how physical they were, and just how they would just instill their will on teams. It was so cool. It's cool to see to this day. I mean, you're not going to see. I know it's going to sound like a what do you call it, a boomer, and say, oh, this team, you don't see teams like this anymore. But no, I'm not being like that as a way to trash the teams of today. I'm just saying that you're not going to see aggressive style defense where that's going to be their sole identity today. This team could not be successful today. They could not, because they do not have the offensive skill to be successful today. They don't. As great as they are in their own right, they just don't have that. Maybe, I mean, I don't know. Maybe if Pat Riley switches it up, who knows? But still, this team is still one of the best teams in Knick history. Afterwards, they would never, they, Pat Riley would leave shortly after. Jeff Van Gundy would take over. They would get to one more NBA Finals during the Ewing era, and unfortunately, since then, they haven't been back to the finals since. I believe, off the top of my head, I don't even think they've even made the Eastern Conference Finals since then. So, unfortunately, the Knicks blew their one chance, and they didn't even know it, but they blew their one chance at winning it all. Next up, so again, another situation here where we're looking at teams, or at one team that was another team in the past. So again, when it comes to the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Seattle Supersonics, I'm leaning towards the Supersonics, and this might be a surprise to people. I'm picking the 95-96 Seattle Supersonics over. So I'm picking them over the Durant Thunder. The Thunder of the Durant era. Even at their best, I still don't think that they're as good as this team, as what this team was during their era. Just this team, honestly, one of the greatest teams to never win an NBA, to not win the finals. They would not win the finals. And honestly, I know it. I said earlier that they were down 3-0 in the NBA Finals to the Bulls, the 72-win Bulls. They made it hard for them. They really did. They made it hard for them. And that was due to the fact that Gary Payton switched to Michael Jordan and gave them hell. But unfortunately, they just were not strong enough to compete with the Bulls from this season. They weren't that good. They were good. They were great. They just were not legendary great like the Bulls were that year. They would go 64-18. 38-3 at home. Again, one of the best home records of all time. They would go 26-15 on the road. Sean Kemp would lead the team in scoring and on the boards, 19.6 points a game and 11.4 rebounds per game. Gary Payton would be the leading assist man at 7.5 assists a game. George Karl would be another big name in coaching in basketball, one of the best coaches of honestly of the last 20 25 actually the last 40 years. I would say he's one of the best coaches. Just unfortunately during playoff time he could just never get over that hump with a lot of his teams. Obviously this team would be led by Gary Payton, defensive player of the year, the last guard to win it until Marcus Smart did it 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago I should say. Gary Payton would lead the league in steals per game and steals. He would be named to the second team All-NBA along with his teammate Sean Kemp, and he would be named to the first team All-Defense. This team, again, this is another team that just had a lot of solid pieces around them. They would have a lot of solid guys around them, a lot of solid players. And I stand by this decision of making them one of the best teams in Sonics / Thunder history, just of how great they were defensively. I mean, one of the best defenses in NBA history. Very aggressive. I know the stats don't show it as it pertains to giving up points per game, but this team was just ferocious. And they were filled with a lot of guys, a lot of solid guys of like Hershey Hawkins. Nate McMillan was a solid guy for them. Sam Perkins, a guy who's really had been around the league. I mean, he made the finals a lot as a player. He first ended up in the finals as a Laker during Jordan's first title run in 91. He would end up with this team, the Sonics, in 96. and then he would end up with the Pacers in 99 2000 and Shaq and Kobe's first title. So he knew how to win. Unfortunately, he didn't know how to get over the top, but he still was in it. He was always in a position to be a solid contributor for a great playoff team, and that's what he was. That's what he was. And then obviously Detlef Schrempf, who is one of the best shooters in his generation, just a very reliable shooter. Next up, the Orlando Magic. And this one was, again, it was pretty obvious for me. It wasn't the Shaquille O'Neal Orlando Magic. It was it was the Dwight Howard Orlando Magic. 2008, 2009, they would get all the way to the NBA Finals on another fantastic playoff run where if they somehow did win the finals, I'd say that this was the greatest finals run in NBA history. But they would go 59 and 23, 32 and 9 at home, 27 and 14 on the road. Dwight Howard would be the leading scorer and leading man on the boards at 20 points per game, along with 13 rebounds a game. Jameer Nelson would be the leading assist man, even though he would miss a majority of the season due to injury. He would still average 5.4 assists per game during that season. This team, they were coached by Stan Van Gundy, who also coached the entire season at 59-23. Kind of a of kind of like, hey, I'm a good coach type of year for him. After the whole drama with the Miami Heat, where Pat Riley would fire him, or he would resign, I think it was, but Pat Riley would take over and win a title with that team. But this was Stan Van Gundy's team. He pushed this team to heights that they had never been in a long time, and they haven't been since. I just remember watching this team, and this team was so dangerous. That's what pisses me off about the top 75 players in NBA history. Because I'm sorry, Damian Lillard does not belong on that list. Dwight Howard doesn't belongs on that list. Because at this time, at that particular year, looking at the top 5 players in the NBA at that point, hell, top 3, there are 3 names. There's Kobe, there's LeBron, and there was Dwight freaking Howard. Howard was the 3rd best player in the league at that point. He was the best man at his position. He was the best center in the league for 5 years. Which pisses me off because I can't even honestly say if Damian Lillard was the best guard in his freaking in his division. Not even conference, not the league, in his division. Was Damian Lillard the best? I would love to please comment below. Do you think that Damian Lillard was even the best point guard in his division? Because let me tell you, Dwight Howard was the best center in the league. He was a top 3 player that year, and he took this team farther than any center in the game that year could. And honestly, this was honestly a year where you kind of see what the NBA is now. This team was stacked with shooters. And I mean, it was honestly really hard, impossible to stop them at times. I mean, obviously the Lakers, but the Lakers were a whole nother level of greatness that year. But I mean, you're looking at it as if, okay, you're going to stop Dwight. You're going to double him in the paint. Okay. All right, pick your poison. Pick your poison. You're going to double Dwight? Okay, he's going to kick it out to Hedo Turkoglu. He's going to kick it out to Courtney Lee. He's going to kick it out to Mikal Petrus. He's going to kick it out to JJ. I mean, just a ridiculous. He's going to kick it out to Skip to my Lou Rayford Alston. Like, he's going to kick it out to any of those shooters, and over 50% of the time, they were going to make it. And okay, all right, you're going to shut down your shooters? Okay, cool. One-on-one. Pounded in the paint. Damn near ripped the rim down with him on a huge dunk from Dwight. I mean, this team went on a great run. They beat a pretty solid Philadelphia Sixers team that year. They beat the defending champion Celtics. Yes, I know we didn't have Garnett, but I mean, still we had Paul Pierce. Rondo was coming into his own. We still had Ray Allen, and we still had a good bench that kept us in that series until 7, where they shut us down. And honestly, we couldn't stop them. We just couldn't stop them. And then they upset the Cavs that year. I think the Cavs won 62 games that year. LeBron won his first MVP that year, so that already tells you how great he was. He had Mo Williams. He still had Ilgauskas in the paint. Oh, and another name I'm forgetting for some reason, but from this team, another guy they could kick it out to, Rashard Lewis, who is coming into his own, who's coming having a career season. I mean, just this team was loaded and stacked with shooters that, okay, if he wanted to double Dwight, he's going to laugh his way to the bank because he's going to kick it out and one of those guys are going to knock down a three. I mean, it's honestly hilarious to think about just how great this team was, but the Lakers were just that much better. They were just that much better. And I still remember where something could have changed in that NBA Finals. It was game 2. The Magic had the ball in the final moments where Courtney Lee missed out on an alley-oop in the final seconds that would have given them a huge win at the Staples Center in game 2. But unfortunately, they just weren't strong enough. The Lakers were on a mission that year. Kobe was on a mission, and they were not losing that finals. They weren't. But I don't know if anybody else remembers this, but it was so they were prepping for the finals matchup of the century. They were prepping for Cavs Lakers. They were prepping for LeBron versus Kobe in the finals. I still remember those stupid puppet commercials where they would just be yapping about the finals or yapping about the playoffs. I don't know if anybody else remembers that on ESPN, but I still remember those stupid puppet commercials where they would just yap away about the playoffs and about who was better. But Dwight Howard and the Magic came in and pulled off a ridiculous upset. And Dwight Howard was unstoppable in that series. I mean, the Cavs had Ilgauskas, who was not known for his defense, to say the least. I mean, he was just a big guy. They did acquire Ben Wallace as a kind of a defensive guy down in the paint, but he was at that point kind of over the hill and just past his prime. But I mean, it was LeBron and Mo Williams, and then Delonte West, Wally Szczerbiak. I mean, that's kind of Daniel Gibson. That's kind of it. I mean, they weren't good enough to beat the Magic. The aftermath of this team is actually kind of sad, really, because I mean, this was the best that it got for them. It was the best it got for them, and this was really the best that it got for them. I mean, after this year, they would trade Turkoglu, and they would trade Turkoglu, I think, to Phoenix for Jason Richardson. They would also trade Courtney Lee, who was coming off of a really good rookie year. I think that was his rookie year, but he was coming off of a very good year, coming in for the injured Jameer Nelson and playing his ass off. And they would train him over to New Jersey for Vince Carter, thinking that would be the guy to get them over the top. They would make one more Eastern Conference Finals where they would fall to the Celtics, and that was it. The year after, I think they got to the second round, and then they haven't. And then the year after that, they got to the first round, and that's where they traded Dwight, and that's where they officially began the rebuild that they're still trying to get through today. So, but this team was one of the first teams that were really live and die by the three-pointer. This was one of those first teams that were really just shooting the lights out. That year, they broke the record for most threes in a game that lasted until really the era that we've come upon now in the last 6 or 7 years, where people are just jacking up threes left and right. Dwight Howard be the league leader in rebounds per game, rebounds and blocks per game, and blocks. He would be obviously be the defensive player of the year. Rashard Lewis would be the league leader in three-pointers made at 220. Howard would also be named to the first team All-NBA and first team All-Defense. So, just a team that I remember very well, and that I think of fondly. Even though they eliminated my team in the playoffs, I still remember them fondly. They were a really fun team to watch, very fun team to play with on NBA Live at the time, and then 2K. Just a fun team. Next up is honestly the oldest team on the list, and it is the 82-83 Philadelphia 76ers. This again was a team that, coming off of a really bad finals loss, still trying to get over the hump of winning it all. Dr. J was still trying to, he was amongst the greatest players of all time at the time, but he was still trying to get over the top. He was still trying to get that championship that he coveted. He'd only been to, well, at this point, he'd been into 3 NBA finals, one in 77 where he lost to Portland, and then 2 more where he lost both to the Lakers. And honestly, at that point, you could think about, really at that time, people were still, I mean, you could have been 28 and you could have been considered old in the NBA. That's just how the era was back then. But people were thinking at that time, when really, how many more chances are they going to get? Because Bird was coming up with the Celtics, and he was coming into his own as amongst him and Magic as the new 2 guys in the NBA. So at that point, Sixers were thinking, how many more chances are we going to get here? So they would go 65-17. They would be 35-6 at home, and 30-11 on the road. This was the first year where after they signed Moses Malone, because the Rockets just couldn't afford him, and he was the difference maker. He would average 24.5 points a game, 15.3 rebounds per game. Mo Cheeks would average a little under 7 assists a game. Billy Cunningham would be 65-17 on the season. This is the famous, as what Moses Malone say, the faux faux faux. They said that before the playoffs, that they were going to sweep their way to the title, and they almost did it. They almost did it. They at that time there was only 3 rounds, so you had the first round. I think, yeah, you had the first round. I think the the conference finals, and then obviously the NBA finals. And they would only lose 1 game this entire playoff run. So I guess you could say it was a faux five faux. I guess I don't know how they put it back then, but they would sweep the Lakers, and it wasn't. And I say that lightly, and I know it sounds like I'm saying it lightly, but again, that was a great Laker team. You have Magic, Norm Nixon, Jamal Wilkes, Kareem, Michael Cooper, just a great team. It was just before James Worthy. I think the 83 draft was when they would pick up James Worthy, but still, just a great team up and down. And I mean, Philly tore through them. They really just, well, it almost looked easy. Malone would obviously win the MVP that year. Malone was the league leader in rebounds per game, defensive rebounds, offensive rebounds, and free throws. He was named to the first team All NBA and first team All Defense. Irving was named to the first team All NBA. Mo Cheeks and Bobby Jones were both named to first team All Defense. So you could tell that this team was a majority defensive team. They had solid weapons offensively, but they focused in on defense, and that's what they did, and they rode it all the way to a championship. And unfortunately, when I said that how many more chances were they going to get, luckily they did get Malone, because this would turn out to be their last chance in the Dr. J era to win a championship, and they did, because after this, it was the Boston Celtics running the Eastern Conference with Larry Bird, Kevin McHale coming into his own, along with Robert Parrish, along with the other pieces that they had. They would win the title the next year, the Celtics. The Bucks still remained consistent. Then you had the Detroit Pistons building something and becoming a solid team, and then obviously turning into what they became. And then after that, you didn't have much until the late 80s, until the Bulls came in. But the Sixers were really much of an afterthought. After this year, they would lose in the first round to the New Jersey Nets with Michael Ray Richardson, and after that I've said it already, but they just, with the Hornets, but they couldn't recapture that magic. And unfortunately, Moses Malone would leave, and a lot of the guys from that legendary team in '83 would age out and just retire. They would luck out and get Charles Barkley in the draft, but Barkley couldn't really keep them at the dominant level that they were in 82, 83. Now, the next team on the list, and talking about the Phoenix Suns, this was honestly a hard team to think about because, I mean, this team has had a very good history where they've had very competitive teams and very great teams. I mean, if I were to look at the 70s, they had a great squad in the 70s. They're really good they're pretty good in the 80s, making to a couple conference finals. Unfortunately, they just weren't good enough to beat the Lakers. They had a couple good teams in the early 90s. Obviously, we remember them under D'Antoni with Steve Nash, Amari Stoudemire in the 2000s. But this team, honestly, was the best team in Suns history up until at this very moment in time. Obviously, this year could change that. They have the talent this year to to jump above, take a step above this team. And I'm talking about the 2021-22 Phoenix Suns. This was the team, and again, Chris Paul making looking at it here, his last appearance on this list. But 64-18 speaks for itself. 32-9, home and away. I remember saying to a friend of mine during the bubble where they really kind of blew up, I said, "Man, this team's going to be good. This team is on the rise." And then when we found out that they got Chris Paul in that offseason before the 2020, the post-COVID season, so 2020, 2021, where they made the finals. When they got Chris Paul, I was like, oh boy, this team's going to be great. But the leading scorer was Devin Booker. He would average 26.8 points a game. DeAndre Ayton was the leading man on the boards, 10.2 rebounds a game. And then Chris Paul was the leading man passing and assists with 10.8 assists a game. Head coach Monty Williams, 64-18. This team was honestly just legit. This team was just legit. They had unbelievable talent, and I still can't believe to this day that they lost to the Dallas Mavericks. They would lose in the semifinals to the Dallas Mavericks in 7 games in that humiliating blowout Game 7 loss at home. I still can't believe that they got destroyed by that much, and I was not expecting them to. I thought they would at least put up a fight, but I think they just ran out of gas. Chris Paul would lead the league in assists per game. I'm pretty sure that would be the last season that he would lead that statistic. Booker would be named to the first team All NBA. Chris Paul would be named to the third team All NBA. Mikal Bridges came into his own this year as just an all around great defensive player, first team All Defense, and then Monty Williams would be Coach of the Year. Again, this team was just great. They really, really, really hit their stride this year after that finals loss. You thought that, hey, this was a team that's going to take, I mean, midway through the season, you're thinking this team was the team that's going to win the NBA Finals. I mean, I had no way never thought that the Warriors would win it all that year. But, I mean, Dallas, something about Luka and the Suns, man. Let me tell you, Luka just loves playing the Suns. He just loves killing them. Just, I mean, a Suns Celtics series that year would have just been so fun to watch. So fun to watch. Monty Williams versus Ime Udoka would have been amazing. Excuse me. Now, next up on the list for the Trailblazers. No, I'm not picking the Bill Walton team because I don't. Again, 70s. I'm not counting them as it's a modern era for me. Even playing field for everybody. And it's going to be the 91-92 Portland Trailblazers. The Trailblazers had been building up in a very, very top-heavy Western Conference. And when I say top-heavy Western Conference, it was really one team, the Showtime Lakers in the Western Conference, and then that's it. And then occasionally the Rockets would pull a miracle out of their ass and upset the Lakers. But towards the end of the 80s, when the Lakers were kind of trending downward because of age, the Trailblazers were there and ready to take their seat on top of the mantle. And they did. They would, going back to the Showtime Lakers, that's the reason why I don't consider, I mean, I know everybody says the 87 Lakers are amongst the greatest team of all time, but I'm sorry. Their Western Conference that they played in at that era was weak as shit. There's a reason why the Lakers were always healthy going into the finals against a battered Boston Celtics team. I'm looking at 87 because the Eastern Conference was more physical. The Eastern Conference was more competitive. Look at the scores of the Lakers in the 80s in the Western Conference playoffs. They were beating teams by 40 points because the 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 talent disparity was ridiculous. Hence why I picked the 2001 Lakers because had they were in the Western Conference when it was at its most competitive. Going back to the Trailblazers, the Trailblazers is a team on the rise that made it to the finals in 89 to 90, where they would fall short against the Detroit Pistons in 5 games. They just could not compete with that team offensively because, again, the bad boys are one of the greatest teams of all time defensively. Their record for this year was 57-25. They were 33-8 at home, 24-17 on the road. Their leading scorer was Clyde the Glide Drexler, 25 points a game. Buck Williams was averaging 8.8 boards a game, and then Clyde Drexler was averaging a little under 7 assists a game. Another head coach that's honestly doesn't get the due that he deserves, and that's Rick Adelman. I mean, he led 3 teams to deep playoff runs. Obviously, I don't think he won a championship as a head coach, thinking about it. This was the first time you'd really see him in the NBA as a great head coach. He would lead deep runs with the Trailblazers, making 2 finals appearances. He would then coach the Sacramento Kings, who we're going to talk about in a little bit, who would go on some deep playoff runs and unfortunately get screwed over. And then he would be the head coach of the Houston Rockets in the kind of the later years of the Tracy McGrady era in Houston, where he wouldn't go on deep runs, but he would make them a solid threat in the Western Conference. But another guy who's kind of forgotten because he doesn't have a ring. But I mean, if certain things go his way in the history of the NBA, I mean, we're looking at Rick Adelman as another legendary coach. This team would go on to lose in the finals, like I said, in 6 games to Chicago. Obviously, this is the famous shrug series with Michael Jordan, where he would just explode. And I think it was game 1, where I guess he took it personal against Clyde Drexler, and he would embarrass him. Unfortunately. And Buck Williams would be the league leader in field goal percentage, 60%. Drexler would be named to the first team All NBA, and then Buck Williams would also be named to the second team All Defense. This team was also very, very well put together. You had Buck Williams, obviously, Kevin Duckworth down in the paint. You had Terry Porter. You had, believe it or not, Danny Ainge making an appearance with this team, and he would be a little pissant, a little pain in the ass, just being that guy, that little, I don't want to say Grant Williams, but be that kind of. I'm not comparing the two, obviously, but be that kind of Draymond Green type of player that just pisses you off. He was like that for the Celtics in the '80s. He found a home in Portland where he was able to do that again, and then later on in the '90s where he would do it with the Phoenix Suns. Just be a pain in the ass, little pissant. But just again, this team is very deep, but just they could not compete with. I mean, Jordan was really. It's hard to say that he was at the peak of his powers, but he was as complete of a player as he ever was at that point in time. I mean, I'd say from really the title years up until when he retired, from 91 to 98, it was peak Jordan every single year. There was really no hole in his game at that point in time. And then obviously Scottie Pippen came into his own as well. But the aftermath of this team is that this would be really the best it would get for that Trailblazers group. Shortly after, they would fall out and kind of losing the first round a couple times, and that's kind of when they decided to kind of scrap it. Not completely scrap it because they would keep a lot of their veteran guys around, but they would trade Clyde Drexler to Houston, where he would finally get his well-deserved ring. And then they really couldn't make another playoff run until the Jailblazers of the late 90s, early 2000s. That included Old Man Sabonis, that would include Scottie Pippen, Rasheed Wallace, just really aggressive guys. I think Cliff Robinson, too, if I'm not mistaken. But again, just another one of those teams that this was the best it got, and then it kind of went back down. Next up, the Sacramento Kings. It's very obvious, and it should be obvious to everybody. It is the 2001-2002 Sacramento Kings. Now, this team was really, really cool to watch. I say they were fun and cool because they could beat you in a lot of ways. They could beat you offensively. They could beat you defensively. They could beat you on fast breaks with some, just excellent guard play from Mike Bibby. But they would go 61-21, 36-5 at home, 25-16 on the road. Chris Webber will be the leading man on this team. He would average 24.5 points a game, 10.1 rebounds a game. Mike Bibby would average 5 assists per game. And also Rick Adelman would be 61-21. This is also one of those teams that a lot of people don't realize were really this was the team that kind of really shed a light on the great talent of European players. I know a lot of people think that the Spurs, because of all the talent that they've grabbed overseas from, like, obviously Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, but this was another one of those teams that people forget about because of how deep they were when it came to foreign-born players. You had Vlade Divac down low. You had Hedo Turkoglu, you had Peja Stojakovic, one of the best shooters of his era. Just a very, very deep team with a lot of great Eastern European players that really kind of set the stage for the great European players in general that we see today, like Luka. So obviously they would lose in the Western Conference Finals to the Los Angeles Lakers and the NBA, 7 games. Anybody with half a brain knows why. But first, before I get into that, Weber would be named second team All NBA. Doug Christie would be named to second team All Defense. And like I said, this team was screwed by the NBA Game 6 of the Western Conference Finals. We all know about that. It's one of the most rigged games in NBA history, if not the most rigged game in NBA history. Game 6, where the Kings were outshot on the free throw line 40-25. In the second half alone, it was 32-12 in favor of the Lakers. 23 fouls to the 12 fouls, fortunately, apparently committed by the Lakers. Kings were up at 56-51 at halftime, where that's unfortunately where the NBA, Mr. Stern and the NBA decided to make a call. And anybody who watches replays of this game, you can see that it's some sketchy shit. You can see that, and even the announcers pointed out, they'll say it a lot, that's not a foul. And unfortunately, after they would be royally screwed by the NBA, they really wouldn't reach up to this level anymore. They would not reach up to this level. They were a consistent playoff team for the next few years, and then things would change forever when C-Webb had that really horrific knee injury against Dallas that really ended his prime. Unfortunately, an injury that robbed us of a legendary player with unbelievable talent, and that was Chris Webber. After that, obviously, they would make the playoffs a few more times, and their last being in 05-06 up until this most recent playoff season, where they really finally put it together with some young talent, and they are 1-1 on the season right now after they just lost tonight to the Golden State Warriors. So, next up is a really, really, really tough team to decide on. And talking about it to a friend of mine, obviously the next team are the Spurs. No, I'm not picking the ABA teams. I don't care. It's the greatest teams in NBA history, not ABA history. But this team here, Just the really the situation that they were in and the ability to come back and just and win it all. It's obvious to me, and it was a really tough choice. But then after thinking about it, it became obvious. And I'm talking about the 2013-2014 San Antonio Spurs. This ended an era. This was a turning point in NBA history where, oh, sorry, folks, my little Spurs logo in the top left corner is not there for some reason. Um, this would be really the last year, the swan song of the uh for that for the big three of the Spurs, meaning Duncan, Parker, and Ginobili. This is the year where Kawhi Leonard became a household name and really kind of put his name in the hat as one of the best defensive players in basketball. This is where it became obvious that he was one of the best defensive players in basketball. He would be 62 and the Spurs would be 62-20 this year, 32-9 at home, 30-11 on the road. Parker would be leading, the team leader in points and assists, 16.7 points a game, and 5.7 assists per game. Tim Duncan would be the leading man on the boards, 9.7 rebounds per game. And obviously, Popovich was the man on the bench. They would beat the Miami Heat, the two-time defending champion Miami Heat, really kind of easily in 5 games. I mean, I don't know if anybody remembers that finals, but there were games where it got ugly, including Game 5, where it really, really got ugly. And before I go more into that, I mean, first off, Parker would be the second team All NBA. Leonard would be named to second team All Defense. But yeah, this is when it ended. They ended the Heat's run of domination in the NBA. I mean, and they ended it. They basically slammed that door shut pretty damn hard. So I mean, just wow. Overall, another great team. They played some of the most beautiful basketball you'll ever see. Passing the ball, they had just that rhythm, that fluid motion within running an offense. That it just was amazing to watch. And unfortunately, well, I can't say unfortunately because this would be the final championship of the Spurs of their era, of the best era of their history. Duncan would retire after 2016. Ginobili would last, I think, a season after that. Parker would leave and play one useless season in Charlotte. But honestly, this was the Kawhi would be the leading member. He would be the leader of this team, of the next generation of Spurs. But unfortunately, bad stuff happened to where it just didn't work out for Kawhi in San Antonio, and he would end up getting traded to Toronto, where we are actually going to next. And obviously, again, this is another obvious decision. The best team in Raptors history is the 2018-2019 Toronto Raptors, the world champions, the first non-American NBA championship franchise. And they would go 58-24. They would go 32-9 at home, 26-15 on the road. Everything changed for this team when they acquired Kawhi Leonard in the summer for DeMar DeRozan. It would change completely. Now you looked at that team and you said to yourself, okay, they are a contender. They have the missing piece right there. In February, they would later go on to trade, I think, Jonas Valanciunas for Marc Gasol. I think it was Jonas. Don't correct me if I'm wrong in the comment below. But this team went on one of the best runs you'll ever see. Kawhi Leonard, he averaged 26.6 points a game. Serge Ibaka would average 8.1 rebounds a game, and Kyle Lowry, he would average 8.7 assists per game. Nick Nurse I think this was his second season. No, this was his first season on the bench, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, again. On the bench for the Toronto Raptors after they let go Dwayne Casey. And again, another team that ended an era. Well, ended the dominant era of a team, I would say. Um, Actually, no, screw it. I'd say they ended the era. They ended the era. They beat the Golden State Warriors in the finals in 6 games. That it kind of after that the Warriors really haven't been the same. Yes, I know they won a title, but let's be honest, the Celtics literally handed that championship to them on a silver platter. Jason Tatum and the Celtics handed the Warriors the championship in 2022. That's just facts. Also, this honestly, this would officially send Durant to Brooklyn. After this, the Warriors haven't been as dominant ever since, honestly. And I mean, a lot of you might deny that because they did win a title, but like I said, did they really win it, or did Boston hand it to them? But this team is known for one of the greatest playoff game winners in NBA history. I mean, the bounce. I mean, I don't know what Toronto Raptors call that moment in their history. I really don't. Um, just Kawhi Leonard's shot against the Sixers. Just man. Do I need to say more? I mean, wow. And also the hilarity of watching Joel Embiid cry like a child was definitely, I'd say, a highlight for me personally. But again, this team, after the aftermath of this team was, I mean, this was the highest it got, and honestly, they've been on a downward trend ever since. Kawhi would leave to go to the Clippers and team up with Paul George. Kyle Lowry would soon be traded. I think he would be traded. Off the top of my head, I can't remember. And this would become Siakam's team, and they honestly have built decent pieces around them, but I don't know if it's going to get put to. I don't think it's going to get put together the way they want it to be. So obviously, since this title team, they've kind of been torn apart, and they've made some runs in the playoffs, but never as great as this team was. Never. And here they are now. I think they're 0-2 on the season of the to start, and I think if it gets bad for them, I see them trading Pascal Siakam and officially putting a close to this team's really just the amount of great players they had on this team. Now, next up, second to last team on the list, and again one of the best teams of the last 40 years, I think. And that is the 96-97 Utah Jazz, the Western Conference Finals, the Western Conference champions that fell short in the finals to Chicago in 6 games. The record is 64-18, 38-3 at home. Again, tied for one of the best of all time. Their road record was 26-15, pretty solid road record. This was a great season where for Karl Malone, he would have an MVP season. He would average a little over 27 points a game, just a shade under 10 rebounds a game. John Stockton would average 10 assists per game. And Jerry Sloan, another, honestly, I hope his name is also not a forgotten name just because he didn't win a title. He's one of the best coaches of all time. He really made the Utah what they were. He made them a consistent franchise for many, many years that were always in the playoffs every year. Whether they and I know they weren't as good as they were in the 90s and in the early 2000s to mid 2000s, but they still were a solid Western Conference team. This team obviously would be led by Malone, Stockton, and Malone. Malone would be named to the first team All NBA, also first team All Defense. Stockton would be named to third team All NBA and second team All Defense. This team is really known for the unbelievable series winning 3-pointer over Houston that would send the Olajuwon Rockets spiraling into kind of down into a rebuilding era for them. Even though they would add, that's a story for another day, but they would add a couple of pieces. But again, story for another day. But Stockton would hit one of the greatest most remembered 3-point series winning shots of all time. A couple guys around them. I mean, you got Jeff Hornacek, great shooter. You had Greg Ostertag down low. You had Byron Russell. Just great team, up and down. But again, they just weren't good enough to beat Jordan and the Bulls. And just I hate how people kind of bash this team because they always when they do their comparisons to Jordan and LeBron, they always bring up, oh, did Jordan ever play anybody? Did Jordan look at the teams that LeBron played and how great they were? And then did Jordan ever play those type of teams? And I mean, my opinion is no, because he was that team. He was that team. He was the top dog. These teams were trying to dethrone him, but unfortunately, they just couldn't. They just weren't strong enough. And I mean, just the Jazz, man, what an era for Jazz basketball that was. I mean, just they were always a consistent team that were always, like I said, made great, decent playoff runs. After this year, they would make the NBA Finals again. Obviously, would lose to the Bulls again in six. Obviously, the final game for LeBron, final game for Michael, hitting the game winner, his final shot as a Bull. Everybody remembers it. I was too young to remember it. But after that, they would have, again, a few very good seasons, but they just could not get over the hump because as soon as the Bulls finally collapsed, where Jordan retired, Pippen left, Rodman left, Jackson retired, here comes Kobe and Shaq and the Lakers to take their spots on the top of the mountain. And unfortunately, the Jazz just at that point, age had finally caught up to Stockton and Malone. Stockton would finish his career out with Utah. I think he's still the all-time leader in assists. I'm not sure. I think he's number one or number two. Correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments below. But Karl Malone would then sign with the Lakers and before the 03-04 season, where he would play one last really injury riddled season before finally hanging it up after the NBA Finals officially. And just again, he would finish as the second on the list of the all-time leading scorers. So just unbelievable. One of the greatest players who really has more of a troubling off the court past that I'm not really wanting to get into right now. But next, and the last team on the list, and I'm going to be honest, you want to look at a team that's just average to the core of just like average teams, either they're average or they're complete shit. It's the Washington Wizards. And honestly, this team, you can, I mean, if anybody else has a better Washington Wizards team, let me know. But for me, it was this team right here, the 2017-2018 Washington Wizards. They went 49-33, by far the lowest amount of wins on this entire list. Actually, no, the second lowest, next to the Charlotte Bobcats of 09 and 10. But this team would go 30-11 at home, 19-22 on the road. I mean, John Wall and Bradley Beal both averaged 23.1 points a game, which I think is actually kind of interesting. Rebounds per game would be Marcin Gortat, 10.4. Maybe 10.4 rebounds a game. John Wall would average 10 assists a game. He would be the league leader in steals. He would be named to the third team All NBA. Scott Brooks would be the man to lead this team. They would lose to the Celtics in 7 in the Eastern Conference semifinals. I remember that game, the Kelly Olynyk game. Just that was honestly one of the really fun series to watch and really great series. Just excellent basketball. It was really back and forth, and I mean it's that series will be well. I mean, as a Celtics fan, I remember it for being the Kelly Olynyk game 7, but I'd say Wizard fans would probably remember this team for the just ridiculous game-winning shot that Beal would hit to force the game 7. And honestly, this was the best of the John Wall era for them. That would be the best it really got. I mean, they'd been a consistent playoff team for the last few years prior to this season. After finally just kind of building up and building up and building up until they finally got somewhere, but after that, unfortunately, just John Wall's body betrayed him. And that kind of became the end of it, where they kind of really fell off, and they didn't come anywhere close to really reaching this level of play again because um and they had another team where they just were a very very solid roster, and they just really well built all around. Sorry folks. I just want to make sure I'm saying the right names here just to be reliable for you guys. um they've finished fourth in the East. And to really put it into perspective, though, when I say that they are the most average franchise of the last 50 years, this was their first division title since 1979. Just going to put that into perspective for you guys. This was their first division title in their division since 1979. That tells you kind of what they are as a franchise, which is crazy because of how rich culturally and for talent the DC area really is for basketball. It's honestly just it's crazy to me how you have such great players coming out of the DC area. Like I mean, Michael Beasley, Kevin Durant, just to name a couple guys right there from the DC area or from the DMV area, I should say. And I mean, just to see that their professional team just kind of just be a lame duck and just be average all the time. Um, but then again, like I said, this was really the best it got for them. And after that, like I said, Wall's injuries, his body would betray him. They would get rid of Gortat. They would kind of be here and there, piece together some guys left and right around Beal, but it just did not get any better, and it would lead to where they are now. They traded Beal in the offseason to Phoenix for a massive haul, or not really even a massive haul. They traded for Chris Paul, who they would then immediately trade to Golden State for Jordan Poole, and that's where they are right now. They're a team that's in the rebuilding process. I think they're 0-2 right now. I'm not sure. I haven't really checked the score tonight. They did lose their opener in a blowout loss, but again, like this, like I said, that this is the best the team got. And actually, folks, sorry I got it wrong here, but it's not the 2017-2018 Wizards. I apologize for that. It's the 2016-17 Wizards. So I'm sorry for that, folks. That's my fault. Should have been more aware and should have double checked everything. But looking at this team, though, I mean, again, they just had really good talent. They had guys like Bohan Bogdanovic, Trey Burke, obviously Gortat, Kelly Oubre, Otto Porter, Marcus Thornton was coming off the bench. Markieff Morris provided that physicality. Uh, Ian Mahinmi was providing a lot of physicality as well, along with Brandon Jennings coming off the bench as well. Just, I mean, again, like I said, the best team of that era for Washington. Again, I apologize for the little typo here when it comes to the year, but that's really the end of the video, guys. Please tell me what you think. Um, thank you for all the hits and really the viewers of the worst teams list. I'm definitely going to be considering moving on to another sports with these type of lists here. So the NFL, NBA, or Major League Baseball, but next up is definitely the NFL. So you'll see that next. I mean, again, I appreciate the people who have recently subscribed. Uh, keep honestly keep sharing this. Keep sharing the channel. Keep um, keep watching. There's definitely, like I've said in every video so far, there's more content to come. Join me tomorrow, or today, technically, for the biggest game of the Florida Gator season for me and all Gator fans, the Georgia-Florida game in Jacksonville. I will be live streaming that game. You will be able to see my live reaction. Hopefully, I won't get too pissed off. Hopefully, I'll even get excited here and there. But again, thank you guys for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me how you think. Tell me how you feel. Tell me what you think about my list here. Tell me where I got it wrong. Tell me where I got it right. Just let me know. All right, guys. See you around. Thanks for watching.